Welcome to the Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. Larry is the author of over 40 books, the founder of Dove International, a worldwide family of churches and ministries in 6 continents, and has over 50 years of leadership experience. He and his guests will share inspirational leadership insights from their journey with God. These insights, gleaned from serving leaders in many nations, will transform your life and leadership. For more information on Larry's books and resources, visit LarryKreider.com.
So glad you've joined us today for another conversation on leadership. This is the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. And today I have the privilege to be with my friend for many years, Tony Fitzgerald from, everywhere, Australia, England, United States, South Africa, whatever. So it's so good to have you with me.
Thanks, Larry. It's just great to be with you.
So where are you now? You're in Richmond, Virginia now,
Richmond,
right?
Virginia.
Now, you started out in this place called Tasmania, right?
Yeah, that's really the kind of center of the universe. If you, we joke about that, but there's on one coast in Tasmania is the place where they measure the clearest air, I think, not water, in the world. That's
Tasmania.
In Tasmania, the
and
most pure.
Part of Australia, right?
It's a state of Australia,
okay,
an island state.
Okay, so you grew up in Australia. We're going to talk about leadership today. I mean, you've been involved in all kinds of leadership. You mentor leaders, business leaders, kingdom, church leaders, all kinds of leaders. We're going to talk about that, but let's talk about where you started. Tasmania, what was that like? How many years were you there? Talk to me about your life in Tasmania.
Well, Tasmania is a great island. It's an island state of Australia. I only realise now, looking back, what a great place it was to be raised. But a beautiful place, a lovely coastline, bays, mountains.
Yeah.
It's great. Population then, I guess, of maybe 500,000 people over the island. Mm-hmm. I was in the second biggest city, about 80,000. And, I was born and raised there. And Marilyn, my wife, immigrated there with her family when Marilyn was only 7 years old.
And immigrated from where?
From Great Britain, from England. And I was in the Salvation Army, which Americans don't know a lot about, of course. But back then, in the evangelical situation, our church sponsored them to come out, to immigrate. And then you could immigrate to Australia for only 10 English pounds, about 15 US dollars. Then, and the government's paid the rest as long as you stay 2 years and work. It's different now. You can't get in the place now hardly. So she arrived 7 years old. I met her when I was 10, grew up in church together, started going steady with her when she was 14 and I was 17. We got married when she was just 20.
That's amazing.
3 months later went into what?
You've known her most of your life.
Yes, I've only known 10 years of my life without her, and now we've been married 50 years. So
that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, again, we're going to dig into leadership in just a moment. Let's get a little more background. So when did you leave Tasmania, the two of you?
We left Tasmania 3 months after we got married, and we got married on the first day of New Year's Day, 1970.
Okay.
So we often joke and say we lived the 60s and we came to the 70s and we got married and into the new. And that was to go to the Salvation Army Training College to train for ministry.
And where was that?
In Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, okay.
So Melbourne's is Victoria, one of the biggest states. And that's the first city when you go across from Tasmania to the mainland. So we lived there for 2 years in training and then went to the country to pastor a church
with the Salvation Army.
What? Had a little bit of got baptized in the Spirit during that time in college. Weren't supposed to, but we did, and had a bit of a little mini revival in this country town, and then eventually went down to the city of Melbourne to work with drug addicts, street people, and that's where we sort of started to carve out our life in ministry, and all that happened in a short period of time. 74 went for a trip to England. And then 75, moved back there with Marilyn and a team with 2 kids in our arms and $200 to our name, and the rest is history.
Wow, so what did you do in England? Why did you go to England?
Well, I'd gone in 74 for a time, and we'd had a whole move of God up in the Midlands, in the Nottingham area. And in that time, felt called to go back. And in that time, without going into a long story, we went back to Australia, because the organisation, we weren't in the Salvation Army then, the organisation had agreed for us to go back and plant. But in that time, that short period of time, I'd say this carefully, but they'd gone into a deceptive situation where they became very evangelism, everything.
Okay, sure.
And that ended up with our ways parting ways, and rather sadly and rather brutally in many ways, because we believed evangelism was a part of life.
Sure.
They came into a belief that evangelism wasn't therapeutic for a person or anything like that. All out of one verse in the Song of Solomon.
Really?
Of the garden enclosed. 99% of that message I believe today, but the 1% caused it. And it was really the church just needs to be locked in the walls, and the flavor it would go out over the walls and draw people in.
You know, I've known you for many years, and I never knew that story in your life.
That's
very
something.
Intriguing. So you stayed in England then after you left that ministry?
Yes, we came back. They wanted me to stay. We came back, and then that's when it all gone wrong, because we had to sell up.
Sure.
We didn't have much to sell up in those days, and then to move, and an Anglican vicar took us under his wings, because we didn't know, are we in rebellion? Are we?
Sure.
It's the days of the discipleship movement,
yeah, sure.
You know, control and that. And it was a wonderful Anglican vicar that had a real healing ministry that walked us through that time in Australia, and eventually blessed us along with some others and released us over to England.
Wow. So as you look back in that season of your life, you're talking to a young person, they're struggling with their current situation, they feel like there's maybe control issues or there's just something going on that doesn't seem right. What advice do you have for them? What leadership principle did you learn during that season of your life as you look back now?
Yeah, I think number one was to seek counsel and don't assume that you were right.
Okay.
Because
that's good.
I felt I was right.
Sure.
You know, on that issue, because the person who was leading it actually got saved through Billy Graham.
Wow.
And I asked at a leadership time, then if you do not believe evangelism is right all the way, you got saved through Billy Graham. And his assistant said to me, well, because God used second best methods once, he wouldn't have to use them again. And that person, I would not ever say name, because that person's passed away now, you know. And he eventually was in another country. I went there to be reconciled and forgive him and all that kind of thing. So on a Greyhound bus across America. So I worked all that through, you know.
Well, it's amazing as you look back. I mean, that could have stopped you on really serving God. It could have stopped you and all the things God has done through you in all these years since that. I mean, had you not approached that properly and gone and seen the vicar, trusted somebody, because you weren't sure yourself whether it's right or wrong. But that is key, finding a few people we can trust to help us walk through things and make sure we're not being deceived ourselves.
Yes. And when we eventually then got to England, I went up into the Midlands of England and was just staying in a place with friends that we knew that we went to. And there was a conference went on there at a drug rehabilitation place. Sure. And I knew the man who led that because he'd visited us in Australia. And we went there and he had the conference. I didn't know where I was really, but I was just helping him administratively. And a girl that was on the team with us the night before the conference started said, well, I just knew that I was going to meet someone at that conference that had the answer for my life. And she came to me the next day as we went to the conference, said, I had a dream last night and I saw this man. And as we walked into the tent, she came running down the aisle and said, that's the man I saw in the dream, and he was the guest speaker at this conference.
Really?
So I went to him, said what had happened, and he knew a bit of the, not me, but the background in Australia, and this was a mission organization. Mm-hmm. And I went to him and told him the story, and I said, look, I need you to be totally honest with me. I don't know if I'm still saved, whether I've just rebelled, whether I'm in deception, or whether in a funny kind of way we're hearing God's will.
Yeah.
And I said, will you pray for me and believe? He said, I'll go back this afternoon. He said, I'll call some intercessors around the world and get them to pray. So he came back that night, I think it was, and said, can I talk to you? And I said, yes. He said, I've had feedback from intercessors. The word's the same everywhere. You're in the middle of God's will. They were in error where you come out of, and it's been proven since that whole work came to naught.
Sure.
But you know, that I wasn't judging that in any way. And he said, there's a man I need you to meet, and he's flying out of London tomorrow, and he wants to meet you at the airport. So he went to the leaders of the conference. He was the guest speaker, had one more session to go, and said, could I be released from that last session? Although I'm the speaker, I believe Tony's rescue is at hand. I need to get him to Heathrow.
Wow.
And the guy said, we only want the best for Tony. You go, we'll cover your session.
That's amazing.
And I went, met a man that then God joined my heart with for the next 4 years while I was rebuilt.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with me saying this, but on the Youth of the Mission base in England.
Sure. That's
and
great.
We became very close friends. This was way back, still in the 70s. And out of there, we went to do a 2-week outreach in Wales. And he sent us. I was talking to him just the other day again in some correspondence, and he said, we sent you because you had a whole team with you, and they had asked for a team.
Right.
And this was on the tip of Wales that had missed the Welsh revival, had missed every revival that ever happened, had missed the charismatic revival.
Really?
And they sent a returned missionary from India to come to YWAM and say, will you send us a team and bring the Spirit? So the leader there, Lynn, he said, Tony, you've got a team, we'll send you. So we went for 2 weeks, ended up staying 2 years, and saw a revival. And out of that, what became Church of the Nations got birthed. And that church in Wales is one of our real little cutting-edge churches in Wales
amazing.
today.
So that's how Church of the Nations, of course, you worked with a team for years overseeing that whole movement.
Yeah.
That's how that started, from that one
We went back from there, and within 2 years, on the base in England, we started the first work. On the base,
right?
And then, just because of where nothing wrong or anything, just where philosophy of ministry and where we were at the time and where they were, we went different ways. Although we have many friends there.
Sure. Now, as you look, I want to get into more. I know you went to South Africa, lots of other places, but before we do that, as you look back on this season of your life, it was in England. Wales, right. This move of God was in
happened in a high school.
Okay, now as you look back on that, what did you learn about leadership as you think about it?
Well,
or was there anything that happened that was really important, and you look back and think, "Praise God, we did that," or something you maybe didn't do right? You think, I would encourage somebody else not to do that.
Yeah, I think because I was still coming out of being rebuilt myself.
Sure.
And this was a time of really getting confidence back.
Right.
I think one of the biggest things I learned from day one was team. You've got to have team.
Yeah, I thought you'd say that.
And we've always lived by team.
Yes.
Early days, even through church planning, we'd have such plurality of eldership, sometimes we wouldn't even have a leader amongst them, you know.
But that caused problems.
Yeah, it caused problem in itself. But so given to the principle of plurality of eldership, of team, delegation, really sharing life. And it wasn't long through that I really began to understand the Father heart of God, then the whole principle of raising spiritual sons and that, you know.
So the first principle was team, of course, came from Jesus with his team, and Paul the Apostle with his team, and on and on. And then you say you started to learn the whole concept of being spiritual fathers, spiritual mothers, and that whole concept.
Yeah.
Anything more on that you learned during that season?
Yeah, well, we always had a great heart for young people.
Okay.
So I got invited to go to this girls' grammar school in Wales to share just in a classroom.
Yeah.
And I went, and the Holy Spirit fell, and a group of 14 or 15, 16-year-olds got touched by God. So then we opened up a little coffee bar down on the front. They'd come after school, bring in their friends, and they'd all get baptized in the Spirit.
Beautiful.
And that. And just about 2 years back, with COVID, I've got to think, but maybe 3 years back, we had a reunion with some of those girls.
That's amazing.
In Wales. They came to Wales, and we all went out and had morning or afternoon tea together, and it was very moving. Which was really the first people after what I'd gone through that we'd led to the Lord.
That is amazing. So you've learned, obviously, teamwork, and you've learned that something I hear you saying is that you didn't feel like you were totally fixed yet or totally whole yet. You're just getting healed, but God used you anyway. You still took steps of faith. You didn't have to wait till you had it perfect. Am I right?
Yeah, and I think that's a key I was sharing with in the seminar here today.
Sure.
But, you know, we have a tendency, if we're not careful, to keep young people in eternal apprenticeship.
Talk to us about that.
And, you know, another course and another course and another course and never quite get released. But I think I've learned this at a conference with you as well, or increased a few years ago when we had a wonderful mission person chair on movements out of, you know the story, how movements went through that part of New Guinea and then Indonesia and those areas. And I remember a thing he mentioned there that resonated because we live with it, that you have church planting movements or works, but then you have these movements that break loose, like one in Madagascar at the moment and other places, where it just happens.
Yeah.
Someone gets saved and starts something in their home or their factory floor or something.
Yes.
And next week, that person who got saved is doing it likewise with their friends.
Exactly.
So you haven't got time to train them or raise them up. So training is almost catch-up. And I think somewhere in the middle of that is a great place to kind of live.
So good.
Because we went through times in building churches where we had people like eldership in training, and sometimes they'd almost be retired before they got through training. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Or someone had to die before they could become an elder.
Exactly.
But we realize when there's a touch of revival, just the smell of it,
yes,
then things happen quick, and God uses the imperfect.
That's right.
While He's working in us.
That's so good.
But I learned out of some other people who've worked in China and other places like that, that discipleship is really not having to follow the lead duck.
Right.
But with a mother duck and the ducklings,
yes,
most ducklings just follow the duckling in front of them.
Right.
Only one's following the mother.
Right.
So we realize to take someone to where you are, you've only got to go to where the next duckling is and keep them coming.
Just call that the mother duck theory.
Yeah.
It works, doesn't it?
It does work,
That's
you see.
really good.
And so we embrace that, and so we release people. I remember in Signs and Wonders preaching outside Victoria Railway Station on the street at peak hour. Traffic everywhere. It's huge. If you've been to London, it's a huge station area. Yeah. And I'd taken a person that we were discipling up there, put him out there, said, now preach. And he started to preach and wanted to see miracles, and he finished and nothing happened. So he came back to me and said, what do I do now? Nothing happened. So I thought to myself, oh, Lord, I don't want to quench him in any way. So I said, I'll believe with you. Go and do it one more time. So he goes out there, begins to preach. A business lady walks right across Victoria Station. There's a little island in front of it. Walks right across, right in front of him.
Sure.
Goes flat out on the ground in a business suit.
Yeah.
Crying and weeping. Stands up and says, I feel totally free.
Wow.
I'm clean.
Wow.
And went and got a train. And so the next time, in just trusting him to do it, he went on into so-called full-time ministry after that. But he'd only been saved a short while. But God just demonstrated His power through him with all his imperfections,
That is amazing.
But I think I saw very early that the Bible is just the story of imperfect people doing crazy things for a perfect, wonderful God,
Exactly.
And He changes us on the way.
Exactly. All right, talk to us more. You ended up in South Africa, right?
Not to live.
Not to live.
But once we started what has now become Church of the Nations, then it was all under different names.
Yes, and this is a family of churches located in many nations all over the world, many continents.
Yeah. Well, most continents, and probably got apostolic influence out into close to 50 nations or something. So when that began to happen and it began to break loose, there was a man in South Africa who was a Methodist lay preacher, ran a carpet business, heard an American who I got very close with later preach a message on rediscovering church or discovering church in a new way.
Okay.
So this is now nearly 40 years ago. It'll be, more than that when he heard that message. So he took sabbatical from his business and wanted to come on a journey to find out what is church going to look like in this new move of God, We're talking now still just in right around 79, 80. Everything else happened in the first 10 years of my life, really.
Right.
All that, everything. From getting married to that point was all in 10 years. And so he was very challenged. But someone said to him before he left South Africa, said that if you're not going to find what you're looking for till you meet a guy called Tony Fitzgerald.
Wow. And
we had one little work going, but this guy had somehow heard of us somehow. So this guy eventually went to Tulsa, went across all the watering holes, coming across America. Eventually got to England, checked into a DTS. We were running a men's meeting at a little pizza restaurant. He came in and said, my name's so-and-so. Are you Tony Fitzgerald? I said, yes. And I taught at his DTS as well. And then he moved in, he and his wife and one child moved in to live with Marilyn and I for nearly 2 months. And they went back to South Africa, and we wrote a book. He wrote a book, and I with him on rediscovering church.
Okay.
So he said, when I get back to South Africa, when I get someone with me, we'll send for you. So a few months later, he called me, so I got another couple with me, and his carpet business flew us out, and that was the beginning in South Africa. He was in a house, had a big upstairs, you could get 70 people in, and we did 2 weeks meetings and left a group of about 50 or 60 people at the end. That became the foundation of everything we've done in South Africa.
That's amazing.
And that's our biggest area.
I made the assumption you actually lived there, but you visited it so many times.
Yeah, I've been there 2 or 3 times a year for...
Sure.
Well, that church has started out of that. It'll be their 40th anniversary next year. And that's where we saw so much happen. We started in a little school, having a little school in their kitchen, this couple. Eventually we got a campus built. There's nearly 700 students on that campus now. And we can trace, in their statement, not mine, but out of that planting, nearly 5,000 Christian schools have started through Africa out of that one seed.
That is amazing.
So, yeah, that's. I'll be out there ministering next year and for their celebration.
That sounds like another leadership principle, a leadership reality. And that is, you sow a seed, you do something new, whether it's in whatever kingdom realm it is, whether it's kingdom business, whether it's church, whatever. You sow a seed, you do it with the grace God gives you, and you expect it to multiply, and you see it multiply.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I think a leadership principle we learnt in that is, that everything in the kingdom is a seed.
Yes.
You don't plant a tree, you plant a seed and it becomes a tree.
That's good.
And so we learnt that early. We were flawed in so many ways. We knew the treasure was in earthen vessels. We were cracked. We leaked. And, I'm not one of those people that could say, if I had my life to live over again, I'd do everything the same. Right. There's lots of things I would do differently.
You and I both. We agree on that.
Lots of things,
Yeah.
And, it didn't always work, and my character, developed as you went. But I always had one goal in my heart, was a prayer that, God, you wouldn't let my gifting develop quicker than my character. Because I saw some areas in my life where it got ahead of it.
Sure.
In the other way. And I think a principle is, don't let leadership gifting get ahead of development of character.
That is a great
on whatever level
statement. Yeah, that's very good. So now today we fast forward today. Of course, you're living in Richmond, Virginia today. I mean, I've met you in airports and airplanes. And, we've seen you in different parts of the world, crazy places. Talk about, now that you're much older than you were back then, and of course learned a lot over these years. As you look back now, what are some things you would want young leaders to think about, to take into account as they are fulfilling their call on leadership? What would have you done different maybe in some ways?
I think one thing, and you sometimes only get that when you get on a little bit, but I think we made for us that came out of the 60s into the 70s in that time, you live with a kind of almost a position where you almost believe Christianity started when you got your revelation.
Okay, that's good.
In other words, this new thing.
Yeah.
So I think one of the great principles I've learned is more real to me today than ever is how to draw on treasures both old and new.
Talk about that. Because
I saw that God doesn't so much, and I use this now in training our leaders, that God doesn't so much move on from, he builds upon. Is a phrase I just felt in the spirit.
I like that.
So I had to learn how to draw from treasures both old and new. So in my Salvation Army upbringing, I honour it everywhere I go. For years, whenever the opportunity, if there's a Salvation Army officer in the town where I was, I'd go and meet him and bless him and share with him a bit on the journey. Because I met the Lord there.
Yeah.
When I was 17, 18 years old, I had cancer, and that's when I first began to understand the kingdom and truly met the Lord, or understand the kingdom side of knowing the Lord. And it was precious people in that church that took me through that, stood with me, and Marilyn was my girlfriend then at 16 years old and was there by my bed. I was in hospital in and out for 9 months.
Wow.
And so even in recent years, little corps, as they call it in the Salvation Army, is closed down now in our town. But up to just a few years ago, whenever we'd be back to visit Marilyn's family on the island where they were still living, on Sunday I'd go back there. I'd get there early. I would meet on the door when everyone arrived. I'd greet them, welcome them, and thank them for who they were in my life.
Wow.
Some of them been there for old now, you know. It's the only place I could go to where I was almost the youngest person there in recent years.
So you've learned to honor whom God used in your life in the past, even though they didn't do it perfectly, none of us do. But you've learned to honor, really, your spiritual fathers and mothers, those who helped you, and that's been a key. I agree. One man of God once said that the seed of destruction or blessing is in the first meeting of something new. Yep. So if you can bless, it was perfect.
Yes,
bless
that's a great
those
statement.
that helped you thus far. Again, we're all, you said it well, we're all crackpots. You know, we're all, Christ lives in us in these earthen vessels. So if we can honor that, that's huge. Because, you know, whatever we sow, we're going to reap.
We're going to reap.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing, I think, the main thing I've learned in leadership is never hold a grudge. I learned a thing from not Operation Mobilization. Bill Bright, A Campus Crusade, I think, in one of their very early books on disciples are made, not born, or something.
Okay.
And there was a phrase in there that I took to my life very early in ministry. And it was, I will never let another man ruin my life by making him hate me.
Wow.
By making me hate him.
Me hate him, okay.
Yeah. And so I always live with believing no one ever got up one morning thinking, how am I going to hurt Tony, or am I going to hurt Larry or something?
Sure.
It just happens in the journey of life. Yeah. And honestly, I don't know anyone in the world that I couldn't, if I saw them, couldn't put my arms around them and love them.
Yeah.
And I learned to love even before you liked, you know.
So it has to do with forgiveness and speaking blessing, and living a life free of offense, dealing with unmet expectations properly, because we all have them, and we expect people to respond a certain way to us.
Yeah.
So you found that was key in leadership.
Well, I'm sure I've hurt more people than have hurt me.
That's a great statement.
Even unintentionally.
I know, and probably all of us without even knowing it.
Yeah, without even knowing it. And so, you know, I realize it's so easy as a leader to become a legend in your own mind if you're not careful.
Right.
You know? And I realize, you know, John Avancini, who's a preacher here in America, a teacher, and I trust I'm quoting him correct. I listened to his series over and over when I was on sabbatical one time on finances. Yeah. Tremendous insight in the economic things. But he just made a statement, one statement that stuck with me all the time, because we went from that to, that's when we came to America to live. So that's, you know, 27 years ago now. So all that time I've carried this very much, taught on the lot. And it was this, one of the problems we have in kingdom life as leaders is we embrace the terminology of the kingdom. Then we go to the world, the dictionary of the world, to find out what we mean. And that changed my life.
Explain that. Explain how that changed your life.
If I could say, you know, just say the word success.
Yeah.
You know, when I look at a lot that goes on in Christianity, success is measured. It's not mentioned much in the Bible, the word success, but the influence and all that. God wants us fruitful, successful in that way.
Right.
But if you look at the journey that God takes us on, if you hear the word success, when I look at a lot of Christian leadership and life, and not judging it, but I realize success for them is just what the world is for success. Right. How do I get the top of the ladder? How do I get more people in my church? How do I do more? How am I look more successful? Sure. But God taught us about fathers and sons and Hebrew mentality rather than Greek mentality of understanding church life, building from relationship to structure rather than the other way around.
And that's the difference between Hebrew and Greek.
Greek mentality, largely there. Yep. I'm not talking about methodology, just in philosophy of thought. Everything with God and the Hebrew people started with fathers. It didn't start with courts. And it started with verbs, not nouns. It started with action, not concepts. All of that we teach on. But it was, I realized so much. You know, I was being interviewed by someone in Texas one time. He was doing a thesis, I think, on church leadership and knowing about us. And he was interviewing me, and he asked me a question right near the end. And he said, what would you've got several networks within your network, you're in many nations,
right.
etc. What would you put down as your number one key to success? And I'd never been asked before. It stunned me. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then he looked at me, and then I said this, not in any way. I mean, it's very sincere in my heart. I said, look, honestly, I don't see myself successful.
Right.
I just see myself as obedient.
Right. Right.
God called us to do something. Maren and I, we often hold hands and look at one another and say, why us, Lord?
Right.
There's plenty of people that prayed better, preached better, were holier than us, were more, why us? And we always come back because one time we said to God, anywhere, anytime, any place we're available.
Yeah.
And we just realized God can do something with availability
that
He can't even do with spirituality.
That's good.
Because you can be the most spiritual person in the world, but not available to God.
Right.
And so I just learned it's His kingdom. He'll build His church.
Sure.
It's about Him. It's seed. I learned from the parable of the sower. You've heard me teach much on kingdom things, but not to get into that today. But on the kingdom of the wheat and the tares,
right.
I learned that the greatest goal anyone can have in their life is to become seed.
Right.
Because the Bible said the seed are the sons of the kingdom, and God sows them where He will. And I have just always said to God, Maren has wherever you want to sow this seed, sow it. That's fine. If you don't want to, we'll play golf. It's fine. Or whatever, or try to. But you know what I mean? It's like I've never felt pressured in ministry that way.
Good.
Yeah.
But Tony, you have been, a mentor to me in so many ways over so many years. I've learned so much from you. And one reason I'm doing this leadership podcast, honestly, is because I have opportunity to sit with people like you. We've had hundreds of discussions already, in different parts of the world, and I get to do this with various leaders in the body of Christ. And I want to share that with other younger leaders and potential leaders, and what makes Tony tick? And we're hearing some of that today, and that's why I appreciate you opening your heart so much to me today. Is there any other leadership concepts? We'll close here in just a moment, but any other leadership concepts, anything you think, here's something I really want young people to understand, or young leaders or potential leaders to understand, things that have helped you over the years?
Yeah, this would be a principle for all people, but particularly leaders. I would say there's 3 questions you need to be able to answer.
Okay, what are they?
And we say it, the who's, who, and whom.
Okay, talk about
Whose
that.
are you?
Okay.
Who are you? And to whom are you joined?
Okay, talk a bit more about that.
Because I realized until I knew that I was a son of God and He was my Father, and I got that father issue settled,
right,
that I could go to bed at night and God wasn't judging me on whether I did good or bad today.
Right.
He might want to correct it as a good dad.
Right.
But my acceptance in Him was unconditional as a father.
Right.
So once I knew whose I was, I could really find much clearer who I was.
Okay.
And therefore I had nothing then to prove. You see, once you know whose you are, then who you are is easy because God makes you who you are.
That's right.
And it's only according to His grace and mercy on your life anyhow.
True.
So I'm not trying to become someone He doesn't want me to be. I can't say, except someone like you, I could maybe be the exception. But I don't look at anyone in the world and say, I wish I was like them.
I'm not the exception, I can assure you.
No, but you know what I mean. I've learned so much from you, Larry, on the journey of life. It's just been a friendship and a mentoring.
We've learned so much together.
This way as well.
But you're older and wiser than I am, so I still glean from you.
Yeah, not many years. But so knowing whose I was, I never, it almost sounds strange, but I don't have to preach or teach.
Yeah.
I love to.
I get the same feeling.
I don't have to. The Father said, okay, it's time now.
Yeah.
Rest. I'm not going to lose my identity. My identity is not in who I am, it's in whose I am.
That's right.
And that's where Jesus' identity was.
Yeah.
It was in whose He was.
Yeah.
After 30 years of preparation, He heard the Father say, this is my beloved Son. Not this is my beloved apostle, or this is my beloved pastor, or not even this my beloved leader.
That is so good.
He said, this is my beloved son. So my goal is to be the best son I can be, and then father the best I can be. Yeah. So that's the journey of that, then to whom am I joined?
Yeah.
I'd say to every young leader, don't venture too far without knowing who God's put in your life as a spiritual father.
Yeah.
Particularly as an apostolic father, but also shepherding father.
Right.
What's
the difference?
Well, for many people, no difference at all. Often, many people I father, they're apostolically line. I'm also their shepherding father. But there are other people who've got real shepherding fathers in their life. People led them to the Lord, have journeyed life with them. But apostolically, they align with me,
right,
or with you, or whoever, but may not see. If the wheels were coming off their life, they may go to that shepherding father.
Right.
And that doesn't cause any offense or difficulty for me, as long as communication is open. Because once you know whose you are in alignment, that's why I live our life out of father-son relationships now. It's a very special thing, because I think one of the probably fundamental foundations that God put us in us right back those 40 years ago, and as a leadership principle, is always build from relationship to structure. Don't build from structure to relationship.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Because you'll end up having to keep a machine going rather than just relationships going.
Right.
And so we've traveled, the journey. I've been blessed to have a wife that felt the call as well and travel it together.
Exactly.
We trained to be Salvation Army officers, both of us individually. We were married, but both get trained, not just the man or the woman. So, we traveled that path. And the mission organizations I was connected with and where we went, see it all that the same way anyhow. So, know whose you are, find out who you are, and get joined to know to whom you join is a fundamental thing of life.
This whole leadership podcast is worth just listening to those three truths. That is so good. Tony, it was a great joy to connect with you here today, and I believe many, many, many leaders and potential leaders for the future will be blessed and grow because of the things you're willing to open up your heart and share from your life. I mean, you're not just talking about concepts, principles, you're talking about your life.
Yeah.
You're sharing these things happened to me, and this is what I did right and what I did wrong. And I always love your transparency and your honesty and your openness. So thank you for joining us for the podcast today.
Pleasure. Great to be on.
Great.
And thanks, Larry.
You're very, very
Mara and I
welcome.
love you and Laverne.
Well, we know that.
It's wonderful.
And it's a mutual deal. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this conversation on leadership. Find those small things we can change, in some cases big things, but often smaller things that can make a huge difference in the lives of many people, because we're becoming the kingdom leaders, the Jesus leaders that he's called us to be. So thanks again for joining the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast, and we look forward to many future conversations about leadership with many leaders that God's raised up in our generation. We're born to grow, we're born to learn, and together we're going to see God build his kingdom among us. God bless you all.
Thank you for listening to Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. If you want more information about any of Larry's books, daily devotionals, small group resources, or any other teachings, go to LarryKreider.com.